Hi, I'm Annie Zelm, and I'm talking with Jennifer Bott. She's the Clinical Services Director for Remington-Davis, a clinical research site based in Columbus, Ohio. And we're talking about some of the biggest issues that derail trials and how to avoid them. So, Jennifer, tell me a little bit about yourself and your role at Remington-Davis.
Yeah, hi. My name is Jennifer. I have been at Remington-Davis going on 25 years this year. So I kind of like to say I grew up in research and I grew up here. This is my very first job out of college was as a study coordinator here. Um, Basically a happy accident. I didn't really even know what research was, but the ad in the paper asked if you had a degree in science and a love of medicine and the advancement of medical science, and that was me. So I applied. Here I am.
Fantastic.
I started in the inpatient clinical trials. We used to have a relationship at a hospital, ran those for many years. Kind of got promoted over time and now am a co-owner and site director. So yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, so I know there are a lot of issues that can happen at the site level that delay trials. What are some of the biggest ones that you see or hear about in the industry?
Honestly, I think the one of the biggest things that delays trials are communication related issues.
Yeah.
The contract doesn't get turned around fast enough. Maybe we've done our part, but then it goes back to the sponsor and it doesn't come back to us. And you don't want to seem pushy, but at the same time, it is holding up the process. Um, Maybe the sometimes it has to do with supply chain. The sponsor can't get all the necessary supplies with all their vendors in order fast enough to get the study started when they anticipate that it's going to get up and running. Sometimes it's not having access to the right amount of patients. Oftentimes when we have a pre-site visit, we're working off a draft protocol, and then sometime between when they select us and when the document goes to the IRB, changes get made in that final version. And sometimes it can be a matter of us not interpreting what is in writing the same way as the writer intended it to be. We used to call that the spirit of the protocol. We'd say, well, is this in the spirit of the protocol? Is this really what they're looking for? And but over time, a lot of sponsors have gotten much more savvy to where they will started using protocol clarification letters. So then we have to go back and look at those letters and compare them to the protocol, really make sure that we are using the right definitions to find them the patients that they really want.
Sure, that makes sense. And choosing the right sites is a really important part of avoiding some of these issues too. What should sponsors or anyone involved in the site selection think about as they look at the right sites for their trial?
I think that if I were the sponsor, I would want to kind of have a Goldilocks approach to site selection, right? Where I would want some that were very big, like your big academic medical centers, because they have a lot of notoriety and a lot of respect in the industry. But at the same time, there are a lot of issues working with big centers like timelines. Things tend to move slow there because the research is not the only thing they're doing. They're, leading experts in care. And then I would also want to include some medium-sized sites, and I would consider us a medium-sized site. We have 32 employees. We've been in business for over 30 years. We've done over 650 trials at this point. And the benefit of the medium-sized site is that because we're an independent site, we're not encumbered by a lot of bureaucracy or a lot of red tape. The decision makers are all in the same office. So we can get contracts turned around fast. We can develop our recruitment campaigns quickly. And ideally, we can hit the ground running the minute the monitor walks out from the SIV. And then I would also probably still want to include little, very small sites where there's maybe, 10 or fewer employees. Those tend to be in more rural communities, and they're making sure that access to care to research is available to all different persons that live in our society. And I think that's really important to make sure that we kind of cover that diverse landscape of humanity when we're looking at drugs and how they work, and especially with pharmacogenetics and pharmacodynamics, to make sure that the drug that works well in me also works well in someone else, and there's no surprises.
Yeah, so a lot of times clinical trials have delays just getting off the ground. I understand a lot of times it is the contracts that get held up or there's paperwork that's not filled on time. What are some of the biggest challenges that you see in that initial startup phase, and how can sponsors avoid them?
I understand sponsors' desires to get the studies up and moving as quickly as possible because time is money, and what their patent is ticking, and they are spending that budget every day, whether or not a patient's enrolled. But at the same time, from a site perspective, really having all of the ducks in a row, having, all of the lab manuals and the vendor manuals written and the instructions developed very clearly, in a scenario where the sponsor can say to us, like, here is your regulatory package. And it not only includes your regulatory documents, but it includes your CRF guidelines, your lab manual, your any special testing manual that's needed, your IRT manual, your pharmacy manual, all of those things. If a sponsor can come with all of those things in the basket and hand off to the site, it really positions us to dig into the trial, look at all the different aspects, come up with a very clear and concise list of our questions, maybe start to figure out how we're going to overcome any logistical challenges that we identify, and even start to create our short list of potential patients that we'll reach out to after all of the approvals have been granted. Like, that's the ideal situation. When those things don't happen, they can really have a very negative impact on the startup. For example, if we have to get a CT scan for the study, and there's no CT manual, then we are going to make the assumption that we're just going to have a standard of care CT scan done. But on occasion, sponsors have come back and said, oh, no, 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 it just wasn't ready yet. Here's the instructions. And then we'd find out that our CT vendor doesn't have a machine that fits these, criteria, or, and then we have to go searching for another one, or maybe their tech that they have doesn't align with the criteria that they sort of assumed would be in place. So those little things, I think the reality is that sponsors can't make assumptions that all sites are alike. Just as I said before, the Goldilocks, the big site, the medium site, the little site. In all of those different research environments, the resources are going to just be different. And that doesn't mean that we can't get the job done. It just means that it's not going to look exactly the same in every single environment. A big hospital probably has a plethora of dietitians on their staff. They're, readily available. A medium site, maybe. A small site, nope. They're going to have to go out and find somebody. So something as simple as that, understanding the resources that exist in all these different environments and communicating well can really help to get a study up off the ground, and be successful from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about enrollment too. I've heard that over 80% of clinical trials don't meet their initial enrollment targets, and this is really costly for sponsors. It can cost millions. So obviously, we want to avoid that. How can sponsors and CROs keep their patient enrollment on track and avoid turnover?
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising that the patient is at the center of everything we do. So not being able to identify patients could be a big hurdle in getting your study to completion. Um, again, it goes back to understanding capabilities. Oftentimes, we are asked for metrics that our systems simply are not built to provide. For example, I can run a quick report and I can tell you how many type 2 diabetics I have in my database. I can run a quick report and I can tell you how many type 2 diabetics in my database exist and what their A1C was the last time I saw them. But I can't tell you what their A1C is today because people are getting care in so many different environments, and all of those systems are not integrated and don't necessarily talk to each other. So if you ask me how many patients I can enroll, I'm going to be giving you an educated best guess based on the information that's available to me and based on my experience. And I know that that's not what sponsors want to hear, but I really don't think that there's in this society that we live in, at least in the United States, where patients have so many choices where they can go and get sort of a la carte care. They can, they might go to the urgent care, they might go to the ER, they might have a specialist that's part of one health system and a primary care that's part of another. It's all so disjointed there, there's no way for us to integrate it all as little sites and give them exactly what they need. So we really just do our best.
Yeah, and everyone is obviously just a person that is trying to make it day to day and can have different conditions that come up or things that, may disqualify them that you wouldn't know about. It's just
Yeah. And I
you're
I think
dealing with
another,
humans, so it's not
right?
always a perfect
you know,
science.
and I think another thing, I've asked the kind of had the question to a question before. I've asked people, well, do you have time to participate in a research study? And when I asked that question from most of the CRAs and sponsors and different people in the research ecosystem that I interact with, the answer is no. We don't have time to do this because we're working Monday through Friday from 8 to 6 a lot of times. And so how would we sneak out of work every week to go to a study visit in the middle of the day? So the reality is that the majority of patients who are participating in trials are either unemployed or underemployed. And there are inherent socioeconomic realities with those groups. Maybe they don't have access to stable transportation. Maybe they don't have access to the most ideal food sources to be having the best diet that would, coincide with a weight loss study, for example. So if the dietitian recommends that they eat a certain way and their grocery store on their block doesn't offer those items, there's a mismatch. So I think really there's like a public health component to a lot of research studies, and I feel like if sponsors and CROs really sort of analyzed that socioeconomic data, they might find better ways to ease the burden of study participation and make it more attractive for people.
Sure. Yeah, that's what it comes down to is just keeping them in the loop, making it easy, providing them with something that may help. If you can give them, gas cards or something just to make it a little bit easier to stay involved.
Right.
I
I
think
mean,
that's,
generally speaking, we find that patients participate in studies for, three reasons. They either they either do it because the research is sort of offering the only hope for their rare condition, or maybe what they've tried for their condition hasn't been successful in the past. Some people have a very strong sense of community service, and they consider participating in a research study akin to donating blood. They're participating in the future of healthcare. And then there's quite honestly another group of people that are largely doing it for the financial benefit with the side dish of the health benefit. So, or potential health benefit, I should say. So we really need to look at not only the reasons why people are participating to help find ways to you know, sort of capitalize on that and make it easier.
yeah. So once you have that patient and you're collecting all this data, How do you make sure that you're not running into data quality issues or any delays because of maybe data not aligning with what needs to be collected?
So that kind of goes back to the preparation that we were talking about earlier with really not only understanding the protocol, but understanding the case report form guidelines.
Hmm.
The report form guidelines are the framework of the study database. And so if we have done a good job building the source documents, we then have captured all of the data points that the sponsor needs. And we really pride ourselves on and we invest a lot of time and effort to make sure that that source flows well, is very understandable, that anybody can even if you haven't done that study visit in a while, if you've been trained on the trial, you should be able to look at that data and you should be able to capture all the things in that source that are necessary for the protocol. And we also try to make sure that we get data entered on the same day as the study visit. So even though most sponsors would say that the data doesn't need to be entered in EDC for 5 business days, we actually try to get that entered on the same business day as the visit. um, the nice thing about that is if you somehow, God forbid, miss a data point, it's still the same day and you still have an opportunity to bring the patient back, to pick up the phone and call them, to perhaps salvage that missed piece of information.
Sure, you catch it soon and you can fix
Right. The
it
sooner
much
you catch
easier.
it, the sooner you can fix it.
Yep, absolutely. We talked about this a bit, but the idea of the Goldilocks site. So you've got your small, medium, large sites. I know it's common for sponsors to work with these large networks because it's an easy way to scale their studies. But there are situations where independent sites can be very valuable. So are there risks to just relying too much on a network?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is that the there are economies of scale when they're dealing with a network, right? Like maybe they only have to do one contract. Maybe all 10 sites in the network have agreed to the same budget. And so they don't have to negotiate those things times 10. They only negotiate times one.
Hmm.
But this isn't McDonald's where you're making the Big Mac the same way every time. And so, no matter what you do, you're going to have variability in how these different sites operate. And so, the the diamond of the group might make the numbers look really good, but there's always going to be, of the 10 sites in the network, the underperformer and the overperformer, and put together they might create balance. But perhaps the consideration should be that, hey, I would rather have 10 high performing sites than 10 sites on the spectrum of performance.
Hmm. Yeah. And what about just errors that can happen if you have one network of sites and they're doing the same protocol, they're doing everything,
Yeah,
but
I mean,
they
you bring
make a
up a good
mistake,
point. If
you
they're
know?
all on the same CTMS platform and their source is wrong, and they like miss a data point, then they're not just missing it times one site, they're missing it times 10 sites. And so what was a small error is now magnified into a much greater error.
Hmm. When would an independent site work really well? Are there certain situations or certain types of trials that are really ideal for a medium-sized or an independent site like Remington-Davis?
So recently, we've had the opportunity to work with some smaller drug and device studies. And what I've really enjoyed about it is the opportunity to collaborate with the actual sponsor team and provide input on the protocol. And you just don't get that from all of your sponsors. And at the big company level and the small company level, they either won't have the experience to offer quality feedback or thoughtful feedback, or while they might have the information, they don't necessarily have one or two experts that can adequately convey it. So it's not necessarily just having the data, it's the ability to explain the data and operationalize it. So that's where I think medium sites really are an advantage. If a sponsor wants input, and not, not necessarily like scientific molecular level input, but really operational, how to get this done input. I think medium-sized sites are really great because we have the experience, we have a good amount of resources, and we're really very flexible, so we can help find solutions that aren't where we aren't like overly encumbered by policy and red tape and, many departments overseeing it. And the little site wouldn't have enough experience to be able to provide perhaps adequate, meaningful input.
Sure. If something's going on, someone can just pick up the phone and they're going to talk to someone that knows what's going on probably
Right.
right away. It's not like you're going to wait days to find out the answer or to fix something.
Exactly. Like
They're on it.
we try to get all our emails cleared by the end of the day. So if somebody sends us an email about something and it takes more than 24 hours, that's because we had to go gather, a lot of excess external information to get it answered.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about designating a site as a preferred vendor. Why would you want to do that as a sponsor, and what are some of the benefits?
Yeah, well, from a site's perspective, we're a preferred site for a couple CROs and for a sponsor. And the nice thing about that is you become very familiar with the nuance of those entities and how they want things done. Um, for example, a 1572 is a standardized document, but some sponsors want you to put the CT vendor in one box, and some sponsors want you to put it in another box. And so then you end up doing revisions and repeat work, corrected work. If you work with the same sponsor over and over again, you become very familiar with how they want things done. And so it allows you to better anticipate their needs. And especially when it comes to administrative tasks, to get things turned around much more quickly and much more cleanly. And then when you're sort of operating in new territory.
Mhm. That makes sense. Yeah. So, why should sponsors consider working with Remington-Davis specifically?
We are small enough that we can get things done quickly. We can get our contracts turned around usually within 2 business days. We can get our regulatory documents turned around within 2 to 4 business days. And we can hit the ground rolling and start contacting patients and getting them in the door, just as within 24 hours of giving us the green light. Things happen here quickly and efficiently, and that's a big advantage to the sponsors. We also have enough experience in the industry, over 30 years and over 650-ish studies, that we've seen a lot of different things. So we're able to, when asked, provide insight or provide operational advice to studies, so that they can kind of really get the best result. Maybe a CRO is coming to us with a rare disease indication that they've never worked with, but we've already done 2 studies in that indication. So we know things about this population of patients that they just don't know yet. And so we are more than happy to have meetings, calls, to sort of information share on the front end for the betterment of the entire trial, not just only for our own gain.
That makes sense. Jen, thanks so much for talking with me today. It's been a pleasure, and I hope all goes well this week.
All right, thank you so much. You have a great day too.
Bye.
Bye.